Hello, everybody. Hopefully, you have just watched the cuteness overload that is my son and his two friends uh, doing the experiment that you guys would actually be doing in class. It was nice that the kids not only volunteered to do it, but Dr. C. Carter actually decided to do a psychology experiment for the science fair back in February, right before the quarantine happened, and he asked if he could do the Stroop task. So it was really easy for me to just say, hey, since you've already done this and I need an assistant to show my students how it's done, since they can't be in class to do it, how would you like to do it? And he was very excited and jumped at the chance to do it. And it's funny because, with their whole school being synchronous and asynchronous and doing it all online, um, the moms lamented that they took this more seriously than their own schoolwork because, of course, it's not their own schoolwork. So basically, one day, one lecture, as our classes would be an hour and 10 minutes, would be used to run the actual study and then maybe talk a little bit about it in class. So basically, what we would have done is I would have chosen 8 people in the class at random. I usually try to, keep it even. So I do 4 males and 4 females. And it didn't matter anything about them. The only thing that I would have asked, and please pay attention when I say this, the only thing that I would have asked is if anybody has ever seen this type of task before, then I would eliminate you from the study because if you watched the video, obviously, already knowing what the difference was or how to do this, you could have technically, uh, squinted, and so the words were blurry, and all you'd see really was the colors, and then you'd kind of be able to cheat your way through it. So I didn't want that. And the other thing that I didn't want that I would have done in the video, but all the kids are, you know, good vision, is that I would ask it that if anybody was in class and they normally have glasses or wear contacts, but they didn't have them with, so that they couldn't see, corrected to 20/20 vision, I would have asked them not to be part of it. And the third thing is that I would have asked anybody that was colorblind, because normally it's either red green or yellow blue colorblind, but all of those are in there. So that would have been a factor that we couldn't hold constant, right? So, kind of like with my explanation of the studying, not studying example, where we said nobody gets caffeine, everybody sleeps the same amount, right? Those control procedures. In this case, it would be if you wear glasses or contacts and you don't have them with you, if you have done this experiment before or seen it before, and if you have been diagnosed as colorblind, or you know that you're colorblind, even if you haven't been officially diagnosed, those people would be excluded from the study. And the reason why I say that is because we are going to use this study to write our first paper. In chapter 2, we went over the fact that a paper has 4 main sections. We have the introduction section, which I will put up a tutorial lecture for at the beginning of module 2. The method section, where you explain what was done in the study in a very specific way and even give step-by-step procedures. And the reason for this method section is one of the things I talked about is even if we got a good result for our studying experiment, all that tells us is that we in this class at ELAC, right, got a positive result, that those that studied did better on the exam. However, we don't know if it would work for a different set of people in a different area, maybe another college, maybe another state or country, maybe high school or middle school. So we would want to, what we call, replicate that experiment. So when a manuscript, when a publication is written, the method section, which is the second section, serves to allow transparency, which means it shows exactly what was used exactly how it was designed, exactly what they did step by step, and even how they measured it. That includes what design was used as well. So it gets really specific and technical. And so to sort of hit the ground running on this, we're going to start by writing the method section for this experiment that was done. Now, normally, like I said, we do it in class. So if I can get you to sort of reimagine doing it exactly the way that my kiddo and his friends did it with me, as if you guys were doing it, and I will explain how it goes in that class setting so that we can write about it in that way. And hopefully, you also enjoyed the experiment because it was a lot of fun for them to do. And so this is the Stroop task. Let me hit presentation mode. There may be some outdated information here, like due dates, because I never changed the slides when I uploaded this to the class last semester, last year. So I will absolutely tell you what to ignore and what to pay attention to. So the first thing we ask is, what exactly is the Stroop task and what exactly does it do? Why would we even bother to run the Stroop task as an experiment? Well, one of the things that you may have noticed is that one of the lists was easier to get through in a faster time, and the other one was a little more complicated because there was interference, or it messed with your attention as the subjects were asked to name the color of the ink in a word that was printed in a different colored ink. So let's start at the very beginning. The Stroop task is a psychology experiment that was made famous by a man named John Ridley Stroop, because again, if you invent something, you get to put your name on it. And he wanted to look at what we call sustained attention. So this has to do with being able to pay attention, being able to concentrate. This has to do with when you have competing processes in your head, right? So the questions that we want to answer are things like, what does it measure? AKA, what's the dependent variable, or DV? What is the independent or manipulated variable? Now, we have had a little bit of practice with the IV and DV in the cheating assignment that was due, obviously, last week. And in chapter 3, we'll really go over examples of what a manipulated and a measured variable are, looking at measured variables in different types of research studies. But hopefully you remembered maybe from Psych 1, and you got the idea from that cheating assignment what the manipulated variable, or IV, is and what the dependent variable is. And then I asked the question, and it's okay if you don't know this, is this a between subjects design or a within subjects design? Of course, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't know, because we haven't gone over that. And that is very true. So I'm going to give you the definition of those right now. And then when we think back to the video that was done, maybe you can figure out what it is. But of course, I will tell you, because there's no chance for feedback from the students in this type of setting. That also may mean this video is a little shorter than it would be in class, since I ask so many people so many details. I'm just going to have to give them to you. So a between subjects design is a design like that studying example, where participants or subjects are only in one of the groups. In that case, there were two groups, right? Those that did not study, 0 hours per week, and those that did study, 6 hours per week. In a between subjects design, you're either in the 0 hours group or you're in the 6 hours group, and that's it. You only get to see or do one of the conditions. In a within subjects design, every participant does every condition. So in that case, if you had two different lists or two different conditions, right, each participant would be first in one group and then they do the other. So they would read one list first, and then they'd read another list. And the sort of difference, and we'll really get into this more in chapter 10, but the difference is in a between subjects, we're comparing one group to the other group or their averages. In a within subjects design, we're kind of comparing people to themselves. How did they do overall compared to that? We're still using group comparisons, so I'll talk about that. We don't actually need the numbers that I recorded. You didn't actually see me on camera writing them down because I only have two hands, and I was, trying to make sure that they did the things right, that they read their script right, and just to make sure everything ran smoothly, because again, it's not in class. So if you answered to yourself that the Stroop task, the way they did it, was a within subjects design because each of my three little participants read both lists, then you would be correct. If it was a between subjects design, we would have to have at least four, and two of them would read one list, two of them would read the other. So that's good information to know as we go forward. The materials we need in this case, because materials are probably the biggest and most precise portion of a method section. So, two of the things that we had, and I have pictures of the ones that I would use in class. I didn't take pictures of the board that they used, but two word lists. As you saw, there was one word list that had words like boat, yogurt, that had nothing to do with colors. And we had one word list on the back when I flipped it around that had words that were colors but printed in a different colored ink. So when we talk about the materials that we needed in order to run this experiment, we needed the two word lists. We needed the instructions, which in class I have in this slideshow. I actually just go back and forth on these slides. The word lists, of course, were posters with 20 words on them and two columns of 10. So 10 on the left and 10 on the right. The instructions, which in the YouTube video were a piece of paper. In this case, when I show it in class, they would have been on this slide. We also needed a stopwatch, which was on my phone with the proper app, and we'll talk about how to specifically label that. Could we have used a regular stopwatch? Of course, I didn't have one. The easiest thing for me to do was to just use the stopwatch app on my Apple iPhone. And even though you didn't see me write down the scores, what I did do after I, kind of entered them into my phone to remember them, I used a piece of paper and a pen to write down the responses to see what each one got. So there were 3 participants in this study, but again, you need to imagine we did it in class, so we are going to use 8 participants because that's what we would normally do. Again, if this is confusing, I will try to make sure you understand it. So the instructions that we used for this, normally what I would do is in the class, I would take 8 participants at random, 4 males and 4 females usually, not in any particular order. I would just kind of scan the room and go, you, please go outside. You, please go outside. Sometimes there are people that I ask, hey, anyone want to volunteer to do it? And if so, again, still randomly selected. But I tend to choose the people that do it. You guys don't always necessarily want to volunteer. You're more voluntold. I like using that phrase. So I would pick 10 or 8 people at random, and I would have them leave the classroom and go stand outside. And then everybody else that was left in the class, I would say, you're going to watch each participant come in one by one, and you're going to have them, you're going to watch that I will be the researcher first, and I will read the instructions to them and have them stand about 10 feet away from the screen. And while they're turned around so they can't see the screen, I'm going to read the instructions to them, just as I did to participant number 1. Her name is Georgia. And then after you read one list, have them turn around and tell them basically the same instructions. You're going to read another list exactly the way you did the first one. and I want you to do the same thing. And after the second list was read and I recorded the times, then that participant became the researcher. I mean, I stayed up there the whole time, especially because they're kids, but I do it in the classroom as well so that I can keep time, and I just make them choose the next participant at random. So I bring the first participant in that I choose at random to come in and stand about 10 feet away. And that was what it was on my porch, about 10 feet away from the word list. I gave them instructions, and then I asked them if they understood. And once they understood, I said, okay, you can turn around. And when you turn around, I will start the timer. I want you to read all the colors on this list. And then when you're done, I will stop the timer and ask you to turn around again. So let's get into that. Here's the instructions that I would give in class. I kind of edited them a tiny bit, but we can use these ones for your paper. One of the things that I like to point out is that I don't want paraphrasing. So, I mean, I want paraphrasing. I don't want verbatim. So here you can see that there are quotation marks at the beginning and end of this, because this is what they actually said to each other. And this is what the person who is the new researcher would say to the subject or the participant. But when you are recalling these things, because instructions are part of it, as we'll get to the procedures, I want you to paraphrase. So I'm going to tell you exactly what I want you to include. This is what was read by myself for the first participant, and then she read it to Dr. C, and then Dr. C read it to our friend Callie. This is a test of how fast you can read the words on the page. After I say begin, I want you to read down the column on the left from the top, starting with the first word until you complete it, and then continue down the next column without stopping. I changed into something like the column on the left, then go to the right column and continue, just to make it a little easier for their 8-year-old cute selves. Instead of telling me the word, I want you to tell me the color of the ink, yes, it's bold so that they made sure to enunciate it, in which the word is printed. Do you understand? So basically to make sure that they understood, and they all seem to, which is good. Because some of you students in past semesters, not you guys personally, but some of my 92 students were like, what? Can you repeat that again? I don't get it. Well, if my 8-year-old and his friends can get it, then dang it, you should be able to get it. Anyways, that's not a knock on any of you. Don't worry. If you make a mistake, please stop and correct yourself and move on to the next word. I will stop the timer when you've given me the last color on this list. Do you understand what you need to do? Then I would say, wait for them to agree and ask them maybe give a summary. So in class for the first participant, I would say, can you give me a little summary of of the steps you're supposed to do? And it would be something like, read down, left column down, and then the right column down. Instead of the word, color of the ink. If I make a mistake, correct myself until I'm done. And that's basically what you would do. Because they all understood it, I didn't have to worry about the summary part, which was nice. And then I say, okay, you may turn around. And when I go to the next slide, you may begin. For them, of course, I edited it to say, you can begin when you turn around, or you may turn around and begin. And so I crossed out, I will start the timer when I turn to the next slide. Because normally they would turn around right here while the instructions were still on the screen. And then really quickly, I would do this. And here is what we call the N task. So the letter N is used to mean neutral in this case. And why it's neutral is this is sort of the control group. So remember in the studying example, I talked about 0 hours of studying was the control group, and 6 hours of studying was the experimental group, because we wanted to see if it's studying that had the effect. In the neutral task, it should be easier to read the colors of the list as opposed to the words, because the words have nothing to do with a color. So this is what we call the neutral task. Sometimes on other variations of the Stroop task, it's one list that's just all in black ink, and then the other list is colors in different colored ink. So it could be blue, red, green, but it would all be in black ink, right? Um, so this one is a little bit better to demonstrate the task. So what we see here is this is the same list, only obviously it was made by another student. And so we see that boat here is in red, and yogurt is in green, and brain is in yellow, and rat is in black. Although little Georgia did say brown, and I corrected her. But hey, if Georgia says brown, then maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut. So this is the neutral task. We have words that are in colors, but the words have nothing to do with a color. So this is sort of neutral. Now, the reason why the next one, so the first person, Georgia, participant number 1, we don't need to know names. We never use names, right? So participant number 1 read this task first, the end task. And once she was done, I asked her to turn around again. So now turn around again. And basically I scrapped this and I just told her, do the same thing you did the first time. So it's pretty much the same instructions. Now turn around again. I want you to do the same thing for this new set of words. Start at the top left and tell me the color of the ink until you finish all the words. Then I ask if they understand. Since they did it the first time, obviously they understand. They'll say yes. Remember, if you make a mistake, correct it and then move on to the next word. You may turn around and start when I go to the next slide. So for that example that I gave you, they just simply said, I want you to do the exact same thing. Do you understand? I'll start up the timer again when you turn around. And that's when I flipped the signs and they saw a new set of words. The I task. And I, in this case, stands for interference. And the reason that we call it interference, in case you're wondering, is because there is interference in your brain between seeing the words and the colors they're printed in. In the neutral task, it's easier because the words have nothing to do with a color. But remember that you've spent your whole lives reading the words. Sometimes the words are printed in different colors, but still your default setting for your brain is reading the words. Now I'm asking you to do something that you don't normally do, which is tell me the color of the ink. This causes a huge competing process because your brain automatically wants to read the word, but you have to stop and inhibit that part, and you have to change it to read the color of the ink, which is a different colored word. So, based on that, the neutral process or the neutral task doesn't seem to have a lot of competing processes in your brain. The interference task gives a lot of interference because you have to inhibit the reading part and remember to say the color and not the word. So that causes your brain to take up a little more capacity, and it causes it to have interference with what you normally do. One of the things you may have noticed, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, is that contestant, what? I sound like I'm on a game show. Participant 1 and participant 3 read the lists in this order, N task and then I task. But Dr. C, participant number 2, he read this one first, the I task, and then he read the N task first. And if I would have had 4 participants, I couldn't recruit any more than the 3, the 4th person would have done it in the reverse order as well. And this is something we're going to talk about called counterbalancing. And why it's done is to make sure we don't have something called order effects. We'll get to that. So now you see you have a picture of the N task. You have a picture of the I task, right? And you can see that there are similarities and there are differences. We are going to point this out because when you are writing a method section, you're going to need to account for all of these little differences. One of the things I want you to keep in mind is that when I kept talking in chapters, well, all throughout, chapters 1, 2, 3, and throughout, is that in the experiment, the only thing that we want to have a difference between the groups is what we're actually manipulating, or what we're actually studying, right? So in the studying example, the only difference I want between groups is whether or not they studied. Everything else I want the same if we can do that. I would love to have them sleep the same number of hours. I would love to have them all eat the same healthy breakfast before coming in. And I would love that none of them have caffeine prior to the exam. In this case, I also want everything to be as similar as possible. In fact, almost the same. The only difference I want between the groups is that the words either have nothing to do with colors, or that the words themselves are colors in a different color ink. I want everything else to be the same. So if you'll notice, and we'll come back to this, but just at quick glance in the end task, we have a red one, a green one, a yellow one, a black one, a blue one, just to start out, right? Looking here at this one, we have red, green, yellow, black, and blue. So they are exactly the same color order of the colors. And that actually is the same for all 20 words. In fact, we see even more similarities. The word boat has 4 letters, starts with B, right? The word blue has 4 letters, starts with B, right? So you're going to notice as we talk about this, or as I talk about this and you listen, that the similarities go as much as we can. And the only difference between the groups is the actual word itself, whether it's a word that's a color in a different colored ink, or whether it's a word, same number of letters, same first letter, same color as the other one, but has nothing to do with an actual color. And this is very important, just like I pointed out in the studying example. All right, so I do it again. So this is how I have it set up. Here's the instructions, and then I have end task first, instructions, I task. Then I keep going, and I have the same instructions. The next person, after I give them, the first person, the instructions, then they become the participant. And with the 7 people left outside, that person, whoever participant number 1 is, goes and grabs the next person at random. So technically, little Georgia could have picked Callie to go next, but she picked Carter. It doesn't matter who it was that was picked, and it doesn't matter what order they go in. The only thing that matters is that they're picked randomly. So in this case, this would be where little Georgia, participant number 1, grabbed Dr. C, Carter, and then she came and she was the new researcher, so she was the one that read the instructions. Now, of course, in a perfect experiment, I would give her all the responsibilities to turn the sign, to take the take the stopwatch and work it. But again, even in when I do this in our class, I let them read the instructions, but I still do the stopwatch and write down the scores and everything, because I want to make sure that it's done correctly. So just to let you know, it's not just the 8-year-olds that I corrected or helped out. I help out you guys too. So read the instructions again, same instructions, but this time, as we saw with Dr. C, here is the I task that was first, then same instructions, and the end task. And then I'll go and go back through the slides like this so that I do it that way. So the way that I do it, even though you don't necessarily need to do it exactly like this, is I do N then I, next participant, I then N, next participant, N then I, and so on, so that the end result is, if we have 8 participants, 4 of them see the end task first, and then I. The other 4 see the I task first like this, and then the end task. And the reason we do this is because one of the things that we want to control for is the order in which you see the charts, right? The boards, whatever you want to call it, the tasks. And the reason for that is somebody could argue, right, that it's simply the order you see them in that makes it difficult. So if you see the end task first, that's the easier one, that it makes the interference one even harder. But if you see the interference one first, that might make this neutral task easier because you saw the hard one first. So in order to say that one of the things we don't want to cause the time difference is whether or not they had an easier or harder task first. So in order to say that there's no difference, half of the participants will see this chart first, and half of them will see this chart first. This is something we call counterbalancing. So I'll go over that again at the end because you need to know where in this method section that you would put this information in. So again, we go back to this slide, which I asked at the very beginning. What is the Stroop task and what does it measure? So what does it measure, aka what is the dependent variable, or DV? Remember from the cheating assignment that our dependent variable is the thing that we're measuring. So a cheat sheet way or a shortcut way to remember that is what is the number we're actually writing down and comparing. In this case, we call it reaction time. And I ask the question, how do we define it? And I'm going to tell you. Reaction time is defined, and you may want to write this down exactly as I say it. So you may want to, if you want to, you can pause the video and replay it so that you can hear my words exactly. Reaction time is basically defined as the total amount of time it took to read all 20 colors on the list. Now, that's not enough. When you go over the next assignment, we will talk about how to specifically define a DV. That's the proverb assignment. You'll see it coming up. And you may even complete it before you complete this paper, because you can. So, reaction time is, again, the total amount of time it takes to read all 20 colors on the list. And then specifically, we want to say that it was measured in seconds, because that's what I measured it to. And if you guys know what a stopwatch does, is that it goes to hundredths of seconds. So it could be, instead of saying 27 seconds, it could be 27.63. And I used the hundredths of seconds. So when I wrote it down, I said, oh, it's 27.63 seconds. So to define that, and this is where you can just hear the whole definition of reaction time. So if you want to pause, right? Reaction time is defined as the total amount of time it takes to read all 20 or all colors on the page or on the list, measured in seconds, comma, accurate to the hundredth of a second. Because, again, in the method section, if somebody wants to replicate our experiment and it's not us, then they know exactly how we measured it, how specifically it was measured. So the total amount of time it takes to read all colors on the list, measured in seconds, accurate to the hundredth of a second. That is the dependent variable. What is the independent variable or manipulated? Those are, what are the two conditions we have? We have the two word lists. So I would define them as word lists. We have the N or neutral condition. And how would we define that? Neutral condition, which is defined as words that have nothing to do with a color. And the interference list or I list, which is specifically defined as words that are colors printed in a different colored ink. And if you wanted to even elaborate more, you can say causing interference of your, brain or in your brain. Again, is it a between or within subjects design? We've already established this is a within subjects design. How do we know? Now, let me just preface by saying you don't need to add the definition into the paper. It's going to ask in a certain section called the design section what type of design it was. In this case, it was a within subjects design. You don't need to write why. I'm just asking if you got the idea of why is it within subjects and not between. So it is a within subjects design because every participant read every list, right? Or did every condition. But when you're writing this in the paper, you would just say it was a within subjects design. You don't have to explain why. To those of us reading, we understand what that means. You don't need the extra definition of what that means. So I will make sure to say that. So just to let you know, a background on the Stroop task is that Stroop uh, originally invented this in 1935 when it was published. And he demonstrated that the time for naming the color of the ink with which color words are incongruent, so I mean the I task could technically be incongruent, but I don't want to confuse anybody, so we'll just keep it as interference. But the color words are incongruently written, which means that they're different than the color ink that they're printed in. This is greater than the time for naming the color of squares or other irrelevant symbols. So the original task used like squares, circles, triangles that were in different colors. And it was really easy to see those and say, oh, that's a blue triangle, that's a red square, that's a yellow circle, whatever, right? And it took less time to complete that list of shapes than it did to do the words. Ours is a variation of the Stroop task, but not exactly the same one that he invented. So I'm just giving you a little background. The difference between these performance times with these two kinds of stimuli, neutral and interference or incongruent, is called Stroop interference, or he called it the Stroop effect. Now, originally when I wrote this, it's 49 years since the discovery. Obviously, if you did the math, that would not work out because that would still put us in the 1980s or 90s. So in the years since the Stroop, and I've been meaning to take this out, the Stroop effect has received considerable attention in cognitive psychology. In this research, we are asking two related questions about the nature of the effect of effort on this sort of Stroop interference. So we don't need to worry about any of this information for your method section. I'm just giving you the background of what the original version of this was and how we turned it into a different version of the original task. And the reason why I think this is important is because I'm also going to give you guys a paper based on an experiment that was done, and this is, a few weeks into the future, about halfway through the class or a little more, and you're going to take that original study and you're going to change it at least slightly to make it your own version of that experiment, and that's what you're going to write your paper on. So it's nice to see that what we're doing is a variation of the original task that was done. So it's kind of like we're doing this as a practice for your final paper. So you don't need this information for the paper, but it's really good information to understand the background of the study. So we ask, what happens when subjects expend considerable effort to perform as quickly as possible on all materials? So in this case, we told you to, the subjects, the participants were told to read as quickly as possible, look at color word items as well as neutral words that didn't have to do with color. So what exactly are we asking them to do, and what are we asking of this task? What does it actually mean? We're asking, is their performance different? Is the performance difference between these types of items, neutral and interference, is it equal to, is it greater than, or less than those observed for people performing the task under a lower level of effort? In this case, the neutral would be a lower level of effort because there's no competing processes, right? Neutral is just asking for the color, and the words they're reading have nothing to do with colors. The interference one is words that are colors but printed in a different colored ink. So the question we're asking is, does it take more time to read the interference list? Does it take less time to read the interference list? Or is it about the same for both lists? And so in the method section, you don't need to know the actual stats. You don't need to know the numbers. So I'm not giving them to you because I don't want you to even think about it. But I will tell you, when I compared them after I wrote them down, that all of them read the interference list a little slower, which means it took a little bit more time to read interference than it did to read neutral, which is what we're expecting, and this is what we would hypothesize, right? Just like when we said that, or I guess I said, but the collective we, when we said that studying should cause you to get a higher score on the exam than not studying. Here, we are saying that in the interference task, when your brain has competing processes, it will take longer to get through that list of 20 colors than when they read the neutral list, which is, again, a lower level of effort because there's no competing processes. So let's focus our attention now on the method section. A method section, as I said, there are 4 main sections to a paper as pointed out in chapter 2. There is the introduction, which is the background of the study and sort of what has already been shown. There is the method section, which is what we are doing today, which basically says exactly what we did, exactly what materials we used, and the exact procedure that we did it. In case somebody else wants to replicate our experiment, they should be able to look at these papers, right? Look at the method section and be able to reconstruct the lists and everything that we did, and they know exactly how we did these things step by step so that they can replicate it exactly as we did it if they want to. It's not always done in exact replication, as we'll talk about towards the end of class, but it allows them to do it exactly as we did it. So then there's the results section, which actually give us the results of did we get what we predicted and which statistics we used to find that out, and the discussion section, which tells us what our results mean and what it means for the real world. So we're only focusing on this second portion of the paper, right? As I said, every paper that we write builds upon something, and you'll be able to use this method section after you've written it and get your comments back. At the end of the course, you'll be able to use this method section and compare it to your experiment and see how you can write it very similar to how you wrote this one. So the method section has 4 parts. And so this is the only section that has actual like subsection headings in it. Participants is the first part. Design is the second part. Materials and apparatus is the third part. And then finally, procedure. This is where your APA manual, 6th edition, I know the 7th edition is out now, but I'm using the 6th edition now for this year. No need to go and change everything in a pandemic. You will be able to use that. If you did not get the book, it's okay. This information is available right here that I'm giving you. Plus, you can look it up online. Although I must say, because the internet is a wacky place, sometimes wrong information is given for whatever reason. People didn't put it down correctly, or they're trying to fake people out on purpose. So that's why I always say if you have the official manual, it's easier to know that your information is correct. But I'm going to tell you what to put. So for the method section, at the top of the page, centered and in bold, is just the word method, not method section. It just says method. Capital M, the whole word is bolded, and it's in the middle of the page. And then you're going to have the subsections, which are these 4 here. Participants is going to be in bold, only the first part capitalized. Design is going to be in bold on the left-hand side. Materials and apparatus on the left-hand side. Procedure on the left-hand side. The only thing that is in the middle of the page is the overall section heading, which is just method. So, what are these parts and what goes in each of them? Well, let me explain. So, the participants ask how many subjects or how many participants are in the sample. I know in our example video, I only use 3 participants. If you write 3 because you weren't paying enough attention to this, then I'm probably not going to mark you off. But Remember that this is based on what I would do in class. So hopefully you're following along. And normally in class, I would say 8 participants. So in this case, you may start out by saying, in this experiment, there were a total of 8 participants. Here's something that can be a little bit tricky, but I'm hoping that I say it in a way that's not so tricky. When we refer to numbers in the paper and in the method section, every other place that we refer to numbers is just the number written out. The only time, and technically there's in APA style, I think if it's less than 10, it doesn't matter. But, or I'm sorry, if it's more than 10, it doesn't matter. But for the purposes of this paper, this is the only place I want you to do this. So please pay attention. When I ask for the number of participants in the sample, and the number is 8, I want you to write the word 8, E-I-G-H-T. For everything else, if I ask how many males or females, again, that'll be 4 males and 4 females, use numbers. The only time that you write the word out is in the number of participants in the sample. So the first thing you're going to say in the participant section is there were 8 participants in this study or in this sample. Then you can say 4 males and 4 females. And then I ask, what is the source? Now, I know in my example video, it's 3 kids from their elementary school is Farragut Elementary School, which was also mine, but that's neither here nor there. But for this example that we would normally run in class, it would be students in your class. So participants were students in a research methods class. And actually, we do have to distinguish undergraduate from graduate. And I really should change the slide when I do this, but I'm going to spell it out for you right now. Participants were all students in an undergraduate research methods class at East Los Angeles College. Now, obviously, we lovingly refer to this place as ELAC. It's easier to say. It rolls off the tongue. It's not as wordy. But why can't we just say ELAC? And this is when I would normally ask you that question. So I will answer it right away. The reason is because there may be another ELAC somewhere on the East Coast or somewhere in another country. And if we need to be specific about where our participants came from, they need to know it was East Los Angeles College and not like elementary Latino Association of, something, right? Corn. I don't know why I said corn. Maybe I was just thinking of corn. So in this section, we would say, for this experiment or in this study, there was a total of 8 EIGHT participants. 4 male and 4 female would be the number 4 and the number 4. Participants were all students in a research methods class, undergraduate research methods class at East Los Angeles College. So there's no confusion on where they came from. There's no ELAC, and maybe there's a different source. And the last thing we want is the reason for participation. In this case, I always talk about, even though they're voluntold technically, I always say that they participate for course credit. Now, a lot of participants, like in the cheating example that we used for week 1, a lot of participants are compensated for their thing. Sometimes students are filling out surveys for a chance to win an Amazon gift card or something like that. In this case, I don't give out any money. So we just say students participated for course credit. And for my kiddos, they did it. I gave them treats, but they got candy and snacks, but they work cheaper than college students, I guess. Well, actually, you can probably get college students on just some snacks too. But so for the participants subsection, the participants is on the left-hand side, bold. Right under that, no indentations in the method section. So it's all left side. There were In this study, there were a total of 8 EIGHT participants, 4 males and 4 females. Participants were all students in an undergraduate research methods class at East Los Angeles College. All subjects participated for course credit, or all participants, right? I guess participants participating, right? Or they all participated for course credit. Any sort of combination of that is the ones we need. Now, this is also the part where you would say anybody that's excluded. So because this is so makeshift, if you don't include this, I'm not going to mark you off. But I would like to see participants were excluded if, and so what were the guidelines that I said at the beginning of this? They were excluded if they had done this before, if they were colorblind or did not have normal or corrected to normal vision. And so you can write those down. If you don't include them, I'm not going to, worry too much about it. But yeah, so that's the participant section. In the design section, we have 4 things to look at. First, we ask what type of design it was. So right at the that's the end of the participants. Right under that, the next line, you would put design in bold on the left-hand side, and you would say this experiment was a within subjects design. You don't have to tell me why. You just have to say what type of design it was. A within subjects design. When we get to the IV, the manipulated one, what is our overall definition, or what is our label of the IV? Remember that in the example I gave you of studying and not studying, the IV encompasses both groups, which is those that didn't study and those that did study, or 0 versus 6 hours of studying. In that case, I would define, how do you define the groups? Obviously by their time. And I would call that IV amount of time studying. In this case, you have 2 word lists. So I would just call the IV word lists. Here we would see in the design section, the experiment was a between subjects design. The independent variable was word lists with 2 levels. Remember, we have 2 different levels. We have the I and the N, or the N and the I. It's not just enough to say one was called neutral, the other was called interference. We need to know what we call operational definitions, as we, again, will talk about in Chapter 3, or if you have already gone through the Chapter 3 lectures, you already know this. Conceptual versus operational definition. So, the independent variable was wordless, and again, I will tell you why everything is past tense, was. I guess I can tell you now. It's because when you turn in a manuscript, you've already done the experiment. In this case, we've already run the experiment. So when you're writing about what you did, it's already been done. So everything here is going to be in past tense. There were 8 participants. Subjects participated for course credit. The experiment was a within subjects design. Right? So just that's another big one, is make sure everything is in past tense as if it's already been done, because we did already do it. So the independent variable was word lists with 2 levels, neutral and interference, period. Then you go and define them specifically. Neutral was defined as, and remember we said, or I said it was defined as words that had nothing to do with colors. That's all you have to say. Very simple. Its operational definition is specific, but you don't have to word it so wordy, right? It can be simple. Neutral was defined as words that had nothing to do with a color. Interference, right, was defined as words that were colors, but printed in a different colored ink, right? That's it. And then the DV, as we've already talked about. What was the DV, right? The dependent variable was reaction time. And then you want an operational definition of that. So how is it defined? So how would we write that? The dependent variable was reaction time. which was defined, or which is, you can say it's defined as, it doesn't have to be past tense for this, which is defined as, and how did I say it at the beginning? The total amount of time it took to read all 20 colors on the list, measured in seconds, accurate to the hundredth of a second. The last thing that we ask is, what is the scale of measurement? Now, the scale of measurement, again, we went over in, I think actually that one's not till chapter 5. So you may remember from statistics that there are 4 scales of measurement: ordinal, nominal, interval, and ratio. In this case, for quantitative, we only look at, and for what we will do for the final paper, we're only going to look at 2 scales of measurement, which are interval and ratio. If you don't remember what the difference is between them, interval represents an equal amount in between each number, but there is no true zero. So if you did a Likert scale and you asked how much somebody liked something on a scale of 1 to 7, there's no zero. That's called interval. Ratio also represents equal distance between numbers, but there is a true zero. So for interval, we would say things like temperature, which goes below zero measurement. That zero doesn't actually mean zero. In this case of reaction time, it is a ratio scale of measurement because, and again, you don't have to define it, just like you don't have to define what a within subject is. I'm just giving you the information. The scale of measurement is ratio because, a reaction time of 0 means that you didn't actually do it, right? Or you're the Flash and you just got it done before the stopwatch even. Anyways, so for this section again, this experiment was a within subjects design. The independent variable was wordless with 2 levels, neutral and interference. Neutral was defined as, how did I define it? Interference was defined as, right? The dependent variable was reaction time, which was defined as the total amount of time, blah, blah, blah. And then the very last sentence, you would just say, the scale of measurement was ratio. That's all you have to put for this section. 4 basic things: the type of design, the IVs, and their operational definitions, each level, the dependent variable and how it was defined, and scale of measurement, which was ratio. So those are the 2 easiest sections. In the third section, this is the one that gets the most intricate, and this is the one that of all 4 sections is worth the most points. So please, I want you to pay attention and make sure that you have as much information as possible. So what materials did we use? I want you to be as specific as possible. We will get to the word lists in a second or in a minute, because those are going to be the most specific things that we used. But think about some of the other things that we used even before we get to this. So in our version of this, if we did it in class, we would have used a computer and projector to show the slides. We used a pen and a piece of paper to write down scores. And we used a set of instructions, which you could say were on the slides if you wanted. And we used a stopwatch app on an Apple iPhone. Now, why do I say specifically that we used a stopwatch app on an Apple iPhone? If we just use a stopwatch, we would just say a stopwatch was used. But in this case, the stopwatch app may be different for an iOS phone or an Apple iPhone, and that it may be different from a Samsung or a BlackBerry or something like that, right? An Android phone. So that's the only time that you're really being specific. I don't care that we used a Microsoft or HP computer. That doesn't really matter. I mean, you could probably, if you really wanted to, you could distinguish a PC from a Mac. But so in this case, I would say materials used were, and the nice thing about the material section is you can write it in paragraph form the way that the first 2 sections are written, or you can literally just use bullet points and just sort of, or kind of like this on the left, and you can Just list them. So materials used in this experiment were, and I'm not going to worry too much about if you want to write it out in paragraphs or if you want to just list them. So you would say pen and paper to write down scores. You would say computer and projector to show the lists and instructions. You would say a stopwatch app or application on an Apple iPhone. Doesn't matter what version it is. It's the 11 if you really want to know, or whatever. Yeah, iPhone 11. But you do need to, even though it sounds redundant, you do need to say that it's accurate to the hundredth of a second, because if you're counting to the hundredth of a second, then you need to know that the app is able to do that. So, pen and paper to write down scores, computer and projector to show the slides and lists, an stopwatch app on an Apple iPhone, accurate to the hundredth of a second. So what did we use to measure the accuracy of their performance? That's what we used. And those are basically the only other things we needed, except for the word lists themselves. And this is where you need to be specific. Because again, and there are, in other method sections, there's probably a picture of the apparatus, a picture of the lists that people can use to see. But here, we don't have that luxury. You're going to have to explain the lists to make sure that from the way that you worded this, I could make a list that I could use to replicate this experiment. So do I need to know that boat was the very first word? No. Do I need to know that red was the very first color? No, but we need to be specific enough that somebody could make a really close version of this from what we tell them. So what did we have for the word lists themselves? We had 2 word lists, obviously N and I, that each word list had 20 words, and it was written so that each list had 2 rows of 10, right? One on the left, one on the right. What about their size? We don't have to get into that big a detail, but we could say, that it was the size of one slide or something like that. I'm not worried about the size. I just put that in there to make you think about it. And you have the slides, obviously, here, right? You have the word lists themselves. You don't actually have to. Sorry, this is probably making you a little dizzy. So we had 2 word lists with 20 words each, 2 rows of 10 words. All words were the same size compared to each other. If you want to write that and include that. Do you need to? Not necessarily. What about the lists themselves? This is where we get to be crystal clear and where we really have to be specific. We want to give as much detail as possible so others can duplicate our test or replicate it as we did from the original studies or variations of that. So what were the colors? What were the words used? How are they similar? How are they different? This is where we would talk about it, and now this is just more of you listening to me. So here are the 2 lists next to each other. I've already pointed out a lot of similarities. So you're going to need to talk about what the lists had specifically that was different from each other. But we also want to point out that the only difference we want between the groups is the words themselves, right? Whether it had nothing to do with a color or if it was a color. And everything else, if we can, should be exactly the same. So as I said, like with the studying example, the only difference we want between the groups is if they studied 0 hours or 6 hours. So let's look at the lists. The lists have the exact same order of colors, the exact same 5 colors. We have red, green, yellow, black, and blue in different orders, right? Here it's red, yellow, black, blue, green, black, yellow, blue, red, right, or green, red, blah, 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 blah. So the color scheme is the same between them. Each word has the same number of letters. Boat has 4 letters. Blue has 4 letters. Yogurt has 6. Yellow has 6, right? And they all start with the same first letter. They even have the same number of syllables. Boat, blue, yogurt, yellow, brain, black, So all of them, what do they have in common? Same color pattern, same um, length of the word, meaning same number of letters, same first letter in the word, same number of syllables. They've pretty much thought of everything that causes them to be exactly the same. The only difference we see here is, right, what the actual content of the list is. So when we're talking about the difference, we would say the neutral list has 5 words and 5 colors. The words are boat, yogurt, brain, rat, and goose. The colors are red, green, yellow, black, and blue. Do you need to have them in that order? No, as long as you tell me what the 5 words are that are different from each other. You could say goose, yogurt, rat, brain, boat, right? It doesn't matter as long as you include all the words that are on the list and the colors. And I know it may sound redundant, especially for the I list. In the I list, the interference list, we have 5 words: blue, yellow, black, red, and green. And we have 5 colors: blue, yellow, black, red, and green. Yes, this sounds like redundant information, but if we are being as specific as possible, then we are giving them all the information they need. So we need to know that this has 5 words: boat, yogurt, brain, rat, goose, and 5 colors: red, green, yellow, black, blue. The I list or interference list has 5 words: blue, yellow, black, red, green, and 5 colors: blue, yellow, black, red, green. Or if you wanted to do it in this order, you could say red, green, yellow, black, blue, right? Doesn't matter what order you say them in, as long as you list 5 words and 5 colors for the N list, 5 words and 5 colors for the I list. So we've already gotten pretty specific. Both lists have the same color pattern. They have the same number of letters in the word, the same first letter, the same number of syllables in the word. The last thing that you have to really understand, we have 5 words and 5 colors that are processed on the same list 4 different times. So here we see boat first in red. We see goose in blue. That's the first set of 5. Then you see the same 5 words, right? Yogurt, goose, boat, brain, rat, in a different order. And the color scheme, except for maybe the first, they're both red, is in the same or is in a different order. These, meaning what you see here is 5 words and 5 colors in a different block. 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. And they are randomized so that no word or color is in the same place twice. This is something that we call block randomization. So between the lists, we see 4 blocks of 5, here, 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 and here. And in the I list, we see 4 blocks of 5, here, 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 and here. Between the groups, between the lists, the words and colors are the same between the lists. Boat and blue is first, and they're both in red. Boat and blue is in the same place here and here, and they're both in the color black. Here, boat and blue, right? Boat is in green in the third cluster, or the third block, and blue is in green in the third block. And in the fourth one, boat is in yellow and blue is in yellow. So everything as far as pattern and word are the same between the groups. The only difference is within each of these blocks, separately, the colors and the words are different. So this is what's known as block randomization. So when I ask you to explain block randomization, you would say in this list, right, similarities are same number of letters, same first letter, same number of syllables, right? And the words and colors are in the same order between the lists. Within each list, the words and the colors are block randomized. And what that means is they are what we call sampled without replacement. So what that means is basically, you can use that term, sampled without replacement, but if you don't explain it, that's still not enough. So each of these lists, within each list, there was 4 blocks of 5 words and 4 blocks of 5 colors. The colors and words were sampled without replacement, which means no word and no color were in the same order within each block, right? And you would say that the block randomization was the same between lists for both lists, right? So you would say basically that boat was never going to be the first word. Here boat was the first word, and it's never the first word again. Here, I mean, this kind of messed up because yogurt and boat were both red, but basically we can say, except for that little faux pas, that no word or color was in the same order within each block. And yes, you need to be that specific when you write it in your paper. So you can write this in paragraph form and talk about what was used, or you can list it and you can say, dot, or, whatever, bullet point, and say a piece of paper and a pen was used to write down scores. Bullet point, a computer and projector was used to show the slides. Bullet point, a set of instructions on the slides were read to each participant. Bullet point, there were 2 word lists, and then that's when you'd get into this very specific, the similarities, the differences between them, and then especially I really want you to concentrate on this idea of block randomization and what it means. So again, you can play this video as many times as you want, and make sure that you get every little point that I make. So that's the third section, called materials and apparatus. And just like the first two, the words materials and apparatus is going to be on the left-hand side and bold, and then right under that, no indentations, you would write this section. The fourth and final section is called the procedure section. So not only did we need to know specifically what was used, but we need to know exactly how it was done. So basically, you can call this the step-by-step way that we did this. So I'm going to go over the steps that we used, and really, in order to have it, you would need to know exactly the order in which they were done. So how did these groups come about? How were they designed? And in this one, you can also write it in paragraph form, or you can you can write it in bullet points, which I suggest, or you can even number it. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So first thing we did was the original researcher, which is me. You don't say the professor, you don't say Dr. B, right? You would just say the original researcher. We don't use pronouns like he or she, right? So the first participant, or participant 1, the researcher, right? So the original researcher selected 8 students from random, or 8 participants from random. You can say 4 males and 4 females. They were all asked to step outside. So in this case, because it was a within subject, there were no different groups. You would just say those 8 participants were asked to step outside. The first participant was brought in by the researcher and asked to stand about 10 feet from the screen with their back to the screen. The original researcher, or the researcher, read a set of instructions, and then you ask, what were the instructions? Remember that I asked for a not verbatim, so don't just copy down from the quotation marks, but I asked for summarized. There were 3 main parts to this that were summarized. The 3 main parts were: read the list from the left column down and the right column down, read the color of the word and not the word itself, and if you made a mistake, correct it yourself. So those were the 3 main instructions given. That's how we would summarize them. So those are all the ones you need to include. They turned around, and then the next step, turned around and read the first list. Now, does it matter that N was first or that I was first? It doesn't matter. Remember, in this situation, half of them N first and half of them were I first. So we don't say the N list was first, because it doesn't matter, right? As long as it's 4 and 4, it doesn't matter. So in the N list, they turned around and read the first list. When they were done, times were recorded, asked to turn around again, read the same instructions, turned around, read the second list. That's it. After they read the second list, then that participant became the next researcher and picked the next participant out at random, and they, again, read the list. This was done in this way until all participants finished the task. You don't have to go and say each person did it this way. You explain it once. You explain that the original participant became the next researcher, and then it was basically repeated like this until the last person went. The very last thing that we want to talk about is that the very last thing that you want to say, and you can write it just like this, is the order of the lists were counterbalanced to control for order effects. Now, remember, I told you order effects were to say that, we didn't want it to be that, one list was easier or one list was harder. So we counterbalance it so it's not the order of the list they saw that could be a potential problem or confound, like caffeine in the studying example. So the very last thing you would just say is the lists were counterbalanced, or the order of the lists was counterbalanced to control for order effects. So normally it says you would write a method section for this. Again, it says the paper is due Thursday, February 27th. Obviously, this was written for a spring semester class. So basically, you're going to have until 2 weeks from Sunday to turn this paper in. And because I don't have my calendar in front of me, I would say, actually, I can look up my calendar in front of me. So let's take a look. This Sunday would be September 12th. So let's go with Sunday, September 26th. Normally it says you would bring 2 hard copies to class. And the reason for that, spoiler alert, is you're just going to turn in 1 copy to me on this. And then we're going to use another copy that you're going to use for peer review. So 1 copy is going to go to this, what we call the first draft of this paper. And then we are going to do a peer review assignment where you will be randomly assigned a partner, and you will edit their paper, they will edit yours. And then we will write a final version of this paper that will be due at the end of that week. So again, it needs to be in APA format according to the 6th edition, so you can use that as a reference guide. If you have further questions, because I talked a lot and you're not sure, please utilize office hours. Please email me or talk to me so you can make sure that you got everything right. And good luck. This is due in a couple of weeks. Thanks for your time. And as always, I'll talk to you soon.